Okay, here we are. Hello, everybody. Um, here we are. Welcome. It is 4 p.m. my time in the UK, and oh, I can see a Golden Gate Bridge in someone's background, so I'm guessing it's not 4 p.m. where you are, Emma. I would love to know where in the world you are. Please feel free to post in the chat your rough area, your country, your continent, whatever feels okay to say. Welcome from Kansas, Kristen. Germany, Nairobi, wonderful. Michigan, Lincolnshire, Denver, Colorado, South California, South Carolina, London, Milton Keynes, down the road, Wales, Michigan, India, Connecticut, Nottingham, again in the UK, Norway. Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate you choosing this particular hour to spend some time with me on this particular topic. My name's Jim Lucas, and if you don't know me, I'm spend a lot of time thinking and talking about acceptance and commitment therapy, and so that's why I'm talking about this particular topic today. We are here for 60 minutes. That's the length of time that I'm going to talk and have you doing a couple of little things with me. But then I will be around for 30 minutes after that to do some Q&A. And so if you have the time and you'd like to ask some questions or listen to other people's questions and take some time there, you are most welcome to do so. We are recording today, and so I will share this recording with you afterwards. And if you're not here right now in live time and you're watching this recording back, thank you for again spending the time to do so. Okay. Um, right, I will begin sharing my screen. Okay. So here we are, confusion to clarity. My interest in putting this topic together really is based on a lot of conversations that I've had with different ACT practitioners who, I guess, often talk about a particular problem, which is knowing the basics. They know the ACT model, they know some theory that sits around it. Mm, they know different ways of doing ACT, like DNAV, or using the ACT matrix, or using the choice point. Um, but sometimes find that they get stuck, and they maybe get stuck by almost having too many choices. And I guess a particular thing that I hear quite a lot is I find myself not knowing which particular technique to use at this particular point in time. And so you can get lost trying to think on that question, trying to find the right answer. And so I wanted to speak to that particular struggle today by presenting a four-stage process that's designed really to help you think through whenever you feel kind of stuck in that way. It's a it's a framework that I share in an advanced ACT training that I do, and I've realized that I've never shared it outside of that training group. And so I guess I'm both excited to share that with you today and also nervous, like not quite sure how you're going to find this. it's attached to certain hopes, I guess, that I have that you'll find this useful in some way. Um, and so by the end of today, I'm hoping you'll go away with these four things. You'll recognize a bit more why you can sometimes feel confused in ACT sessions, that you'll have a four-stage process to organize your thinking more easily, more clearly, that within each of these stages, you'll be able to identify what some of the common problems are that show up, and that then this will help you choose a more useful next focus instead of maybe rushing in or responding quickly or automatically to different models or techniques that you've learned to use with particular clients. As I said, there'll be a Q&A at the end, so you can write down questions that show up for you along the way and save them for the end if you want. But if you feel like um, there's something that you really want to ask sooner, please feel free to do so. I might not notice it in the chat, so feel free to raise your hand and come in at that point. And I'll be happy to respond to your question at that point. Okay, so two quick questions for you to ponder, to think on. Have you ever known in a session several ACT interventions that you could use, but felt unsure what to focus on in particular? Which one of those interventions to choose? Just taking a moment to notice that for yourself. And have you ever left sessions thinking, I'm not sure that I helped this forward clearly enough? You're left with those uncertainties, those doubts about was that session actually helpful today? Now I'm going to raise my hand as a yes to both of those questions. They seem quite familiar to me. Okay, so I started to talk about why I put this together, why I wanted to share it in response to a way that we can get stuck as ACT practitioners. And I alluded to this particular problem that we might know exercises, things like diffusion, things like present moment, but maybe not sure which is the best to use at a particular time. Do I do diffusion? For example, you might be noticing fusion in your client's behavior in the room with you. You might think to do diffusion, and you do that. But equally, that diffusion might not work as you were hoping for. So then you might be thinking about other techniques and processes that you might draw on, but still feeling not quite sure which is best here. It's quite easy to get pulled into content. So what I mean by this is get pulled into the stories that clients tell. And this I'm more vulnerable to this when I'm sitting with somebody who likes to go into or has learned to go into a lot of detail about things that they struggle with. And so they might have lots of examples, um, lots of events that they want to tell me about. And I'm more likely to get drawn into that content and then feel like I'm lost. I'm not sure what my direction is. Where are we going? What are we trying to achieve? And so in those moments, that's, I think, what's happened. I've got lost in content rather than being able to stay paying attention to context and function. We might be trying to look for the perfect intervention or the perfect way of facilitating an intervention. I wonder if you can identify with talking about interventions more than actually showing them or creating opportunities for a client to do a particular exercise. Maybe you know, or you see yourself talking about acceptance more often than teaching a client how to do acceptance. And I think we fall into that trap probably when we have doubts about how well our facilitation is going to land, or we might have a worry that it's going to make our client feel worse. And so we might get stuck because we're backing off from that the risk of those things happening. And as I show you this four-stage process here, one of the points I'm going to be making is that um, we might be trying to do the wrong thing at the wrong time. And so we can move ahead too quickly in the process that we end up encountering problems. And so what I'm about to show you will hopefully help with being able to foresee certain problems that you're likely to encounter if you move too quickly in some of these ways. So I think that clarity, and that's what we're talking about here, is how to go from feeling more confused to feeling clearer about what to do. That kind of clarity, I think, comes less often from knowing more ACT techniques. Like, do you notice the worry of, well, I've taught my client everything I know. I've got no other exercises in my therapeutic toolkit that I can show them. And that can lead to a bit of anxiety that takes you towards another workshop, takes you towards another textbook. I need to fill up my therapeutic arsenal with more techniques so I don't run the risk of like not knowing another technique to show my client. But more often than not, and particularly for me, that's led to less clarity rather than more. And so I think more often the clarity comes from knowing what job is going to be helpful for me to do now. So I'm interested here in these two questions as well. Right? Interested in what comes up for you. Which is more common? Do you notice that you can be in a session and have too few ideas about what to do, or too many? Or I guess if we're staying close to contextualism here, does it depend? Does it depend on who you're with, what it is that they're doing, what stage of the work you're in? Maybe different things going on for you that particular day. Is it a session at the end of the day versus the start of the day? At what point in sessions do you most often lose clarity? Is there a pattern to that? I notice that when I don't try to establish clarity from the beginning of the session, then I run into certain problems to do with confusion and being more aimless if that's not addressed kind of early on. And so that's where we're going to start when it comes to this particular model. So this is the four-stage model, what I'm calling an effective active practice process. And so it's a therapy framework. And these elements can help you stay on track with your interventions and building your X skills. So if we start at the top here, we've got connect with your client, come round to develop functional analysis. At 6 o'clock, we can see we can control patterns. And then over at 9 o'clock, we can see strengthen psychological flexibility. So what does it mean when we're talking about connect with your client? For me, it means getting to know my client as a whole person, not just what it is that they're struggling with. And there's a risk of this. Like, certainly, in that first appointment, and I had a first appointment with someone today, I asked them, where do you want to start? What's brought you here? And so naturally, they tell me about the difficulty that's got them in the room with me. And if we're not careful, we could spend the whole time talking about that particular problem. And if we do that, some certain things are more likely to happen. Like, I'm probably not going to understand enough about why this problem matters. Like, what does it prevent? What does it get in the way of? What does it create a barrier to? If you've ever read any books or done any training with Kirk Strossel and Patty Robinson, particularly their focused act model, then you would have come across their contextual interview. And it's a lovely approach to the beginning of therapy because it orients you, the therapist, toward this particular point of getting to know your client as a whole person. Like, what's happening when it comes to their health? What do they do for money? How connected are they in different relationships? What do they do for fun? You know, it's really emphasized in it's- Kelly Wilson's bit about, the clients are more than just a life support machine for their problem. Yeah, like I and my client can orient towards that if we're not taking time to know, like, why this problem matters. Like, why does it matter when it comes to relationships? Why does it matter when it comes to performance in something? Why does it matter when it comes to work or your health? And so then when we take our time to explore this, we can start to see a bit more about who is this person? Um, what do they care about in front of us? Okay. Let's start to get a better sense of that. It's useful to spend time on developing a functional analysis of the problem. This is where you and your client get to see more clearly the habits that they engage in. It's about spotting patterns. And you get to see the learning history that's influenced them. And you get to see the setting in which these particular problems can occur. Like, it might occur across all areas of their life, nearly all the time, and it might not. It might just show up, in a particular relationship. And so when we get a better picture, I feel like this is like painting a landscape. This can give us a plan, it can be the start of a plan for creating transformation. From there, I think it's useful and important to then think about weakening unhelpful control patterns. This is where we would typically do creative hopelessness. And so we're guiding clients here to observe their actions, noticing what they do and what they get when they do that. And this is behaviorism. You do something, you get something. In my experience, people are often more oriented toward the reasons why they do something, not really so much the functions of why they do something. Like, for example, somebody might slam the door at home when they feel angry. And if you were to ask them, why did you slam the door? They might say, because I was feeling really angry. So they give you a reason as to why that happened. But if you ask them, like, were you hoping for? What were you hoping would happen when you slammed the door? That's a different kind of question. And so the answer might be more something like, well, I was hoping the other person in the house might notice just how angry I was. And so, like, when we spend time looking at how well things work in terms of communicating what a person wants to communicate, we could start to weaken the investment in those patterns that they're currently engaged in. This is the beginning of acceptance work and openness work, of course. And then it opens up the possibility of alternatives. People can start to be more interested in doing something different because they start to connect with how doing what they're doing isn't working. And this is where then I think we're more ready, we're at a better stage to start teaching clients how to practice awareness, openness, engagement skills so that it can lead to those benefits about more vitality, better mental health and physical health, less distress. Okay. Any questions from anybody here?
Just want to say, Jim, is this all going to be on a slide or a PowerPoint?
Yes, so
Yeah,
I'll send you the video, but I'll send you the
no,
slide.
thanks. I need to be writing it all down. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
I have a question. My name is
Yeah, hi Jim.
Jill from Alaska. Um, when you said something really important that resonates with me about getting lost in content instead of listening for context, that's like
Yes.
mind blowing, and I can really relate to that. How do you orient your client for that approach? And like, or how do you interrupt your client? um, like like functionally when your client's talking to you, how do you say, okay, wait a minute, you're giving a lot of content. Let's get, and then how would you practically do that to validate your client and still kind of redirect them towards
Yeah.
um
Yeah. Yeah, it's a great question. And I can hear, I think, in it that there's two things that you're trying to hold that seem important. One is the importance of interrupting your client in order to help them. And the other is like being careful about it, that like something negative doesn't happen for them. Like there's no rupture or, am I guessing those two things present in your question, your concern here?
mhm. And
Mm,
also just and to not invalidate them by
right.
not listening to them,
Yeah.
especially say in the context of developmental trauma or historical invalidation where they've been not
Yes.
being not listened to is part of the concern.
So I guess what I'm remembering is typically a way that I would do that is I would interrupt somebody and I would say, can I interrupt you here for a moment? I'm listening to what you're saying, but I'm also noticing that I think I'm missing something really important. And that is like, what are you hoping for when you tell me this? How did that land with you?
That like felt validating. I was just
Okay,
sitting with the feeling of I was like, wow, that seemed really kind of easy, but yeah, you interrupted them so that you could get to something very important. Yeah, I mean that was great. Thank you. Okay.
cool. Thanks for the
Yeah.
question, Jill.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's move through these four things in a bit more detail. Because what I want to do is within each step is talk about the problems that can occur if we skip these particular steps, what that might look like in the therapy room, um, what some solutions are then to not falling into that trap, and then like some questions that you can ask yourself um, to help you know, do I know enough yet that it makes it ready for me to move on to the next step? Okay, so this first piece, connecting fully with your client. So the problem that I think here that can occur is that we can move too quickly into teaching. Um, maybe we try to explain the ACT model, or we try to explain psychological flexibility, or we try to target specific processes before we've connected fully with the client as a whole person. And so this might look like when a client is leading a session. Like, I've no doubt you're very familiar with sessions that look like a client telling you about what's happened to them that week. And there can be a lot of story to it. But within that, and I might respond with like, oh, tell me more about that, or curiosity about a certain aspect of those events. And we can get into talking about it. But neither of us, if we could do that, have actually said that's what we want to choose to do right now. And it's interesting sometimes when I ask people, so that's happened to you this week. Is that what you'd like us to spend time on today? Quite often the answer is actually no, what I really wanted to focus on is this. And so it's really important to evoke choosing at the start of each session. We run the risk of deciding also what to do quickly based on a brief description of the problem. Like maybe we just hear that they're anxious about a particular situation. It's holiday season at the moment, at least in the Northern Hemisphere. And I've got clients coming through saying, I'm getting on a plane in 2 days and I'm petrified. What do I do? And so, I could run the risk of like trying to teach them something new, but really we've not got a lot of time in order for that to kind of take effect probably. And also, I'm not quite sure like how that's going to function for that person if we just kind of move quickly into that. When people come to therapy, at least in the earlier stages, one of the ways they're orienting to their experience is that it's a problem. It's a problem to be solved. It's an event or a series of events to be fixed. And so they're often problem solving, and we can fall into that trap too of problem solving. I might not know enough about this person's cultural context or their historical context. And um, I might be feeling impatient or overly eager to start exercises quickly. And I notice that urge when I start with a new client. This is great. I can avoid all the previous mistakes that I've made with other clients. Let's go. But it can put a lot of pressure on me, and I can mm, create agitation for me if I fuse with that too much. So I think the solution or our job at this stage is to take our time a bit more. Therapy isn't a quick process. Sometimes clients might want it to be, but I think one of our job is about slowing people down and slowing the process down so we can start to understand them, not just the problem, find out what matters to them, build enough safety and connection for more difficult work later on, and establish really why do these struggles matter? And that can be hidden. That can be outside a person's story when they're just talking about what's difficult. So here's some practical questions for you as a practitioner. And they're things I like to ask myself is how much do I know about this client's life beyond the problem that they've told me? If I know very little, it's a cue that I need to ask more and find out more because I want to know more about that context. And what matters to them enough to make this struggle worthwhile to work on? Again, if I don't know the answer to that, that's a cue for me to try and find out a bit more. If you feel like you do know the answers to these questions, then I would suggest that there's a readiness to move on to the next step, developing a functional analysis. If we rush this step or don't do it, spend enough time on it, um, and I appreciate that can happen in pressurized work environments. Um, or it can also happen when we're not quite sure how to do a functional analysis in an app consistent way. But without it, we run the risk of jumping quickly into interventions before understanding what it is that's maintaining the problem. What are those patterns that exist? So how does this look in the room? It might look like we rush into a well-rehearsed intervention. Maybe we've got our handful of favorite exercises. One of my favorites earlier on in my career was a mindfulness exercise, a present moment exercise called Notice and Return. And I often just started, it would be one of the first things that I taught somebody. But I don't do it so formulaically anymore because I guess what I've learned is that um, it could have been helpful, but I didn't know if it was. And it wasn't me responding to a well-developed functional analysis. It was just me doing something that I liked, that I knew, that I was familiar with, that I found straightforward to do. Again, if we rush into this, we also run the risk of our interventions being about trying to reduce unwanted experiences or patterns of behavior instead of expansions of repertoire. So in ACT, we're trying to add behaviors into contexts that often are aversive for people rather than trying to remove things. And I often say to somebody, you don't have to give that up, taking that diazepam or having that drink. We're going to leave that on the menu of possibilities, but we're going to add to it. So you've got a range of things to choose from. Sometimes, like if I rush into a diffusion exercise, for example, then the client may be using that as a way of trying to get rid of things that they don't want to think. I work with a lot of people with suffer from obsessive compulsive patterns and loops, and that's a big risk often in those situations. We might adopt a more mentalistic way of doing ACT. So this is like where I guess we're noticing content and trying to respond to a certain truth of it. Like somebody might think they're a failure, and we run into the habit of trying to find evidence why they're not, trying to find examples of how that might not be true. See, it's possible to do self as context work like that as well. Any, I guess, of the processes, but a functional analysis can help us avoid that trap. It's also one of the limitations of a protocol is that often they don't have in it, like, let's do a functional analysis of your particular pattern of difficulties. We start off with this exercise, followed by that exercise, followed by that exercise. And so a protocol is really organized by procedure rather than it is by processes. We might try to make one session about diffusion or one session about values. And so we end up treating psychological flexibility in a segmented fashion rather than seeing how we can start to integrate the processes within a session. Right? Can practice some diffusion to be less reactive, but like we don't stop there. We want to use it as a basis for them being able to choose something more values-based. There can be a lack of curiosity about the big picture, both in terms of what's happening now and historically, and this can lead to missed opportunities that might actually be more effective now. There might be confusion about what the client is doing and getting. Like they're doing this and they're getting that, but we don't see that relationship. And so we might not know without functional analysis, why do they keep engaging in this pattern? People say, oh, I keep doing this, and I know it doesn't help me, but they keep doing it anyway. Right? There's a piece of the puzzle that they've not yet observed. So I think our job at this stage is to, um, with the client, identify what it is that they tend to do in the context that they struggle. What setting is that? Where is it? When is it? Is there anyone else there? Are they on their own? What other environmental factors matter in that context that they struggle? What patterns help them avoid control or gain? Uh, sorry, no, let me say that again. What do the patterns help them to avoid? What does it help them to control? What does it give them? Um, like I am, like an act consistent way of thinking about depression, for example, is that depression isn't something that somebody has, but it's something that somebody does. And when I say that, I don't mean that people, when they're depressed, set out to create depression for themselves. But often what's going on is they're relying on numbing, emotional numbing behaviors that lead to a sort of hopeless and inert state. And although that might be not what they want, when we do our functional analysis, we might see behind it that that numbing and that inert state helps them to avoid certain other feelings that are more difficult, more painful. And again, it's really important and useful to see how learning history participates in the problem. So we can help people understand what we call the acting context, that everything about what you're struggling with really does make sense when we know what your life history has had in it, what those communications have been from other people, what events you've encountered. So some questions I like to ask myself to help me decide, am I ready to move on to the next step, are, what does this client do when the problem shows up? What does that response give them? What does it lead to? What does this pattern allow them to avoid? What am I missing about this context? Do I not know enough about when and where it occurs, or is there something in the history that like helps us see why this is happening for them? Okay. So you might just take a moment here with what we've covered so far. We're halfway through this four-step process. How much do you notice whether you take enough time over these two steps? Does this like is this a cue for you? This would be useful for me to spend more time on. Okay. So this takes us to step 3, weakening unhelpful control patterns. As I said, this is where creative hopelessness work is often done. Problem that can occur here if we don't take our time is that we can rush in again into building flexibility before enough attention has been given to this experiential control that's narrowing the client's life. Like I could I could teach a client any exercise, anything within the ACT model, but it might not function in terms of building flexibility because how the client has learned to receive whatever I teach them at that point in time is about getting rid of what it is they don't want to feel. And until somebody has started to connect with the way I'm doing things doesn't work, the way I'm doing things is futile, the way I'm doing things costs me, then I would say they're not really ready to start building psychological flexibility. So that's the first point I was just describing. I guess when we're doing this work as well, we can focus on what's happening outside the room as well as what's happening inside the room. I think often as practitioners, we get drawn into working what's going on outside the room, and we might try to change what's going on outside the room. But it can be a sort of like give somebody a gift and hope for the best kind of approach to therapy if we just rely on doing therapy that way. I really want to shape behavior in the here and the now as much as possible. So I get to see whether somebody is actually doing something different through my own eyes. So, for example, if somebody is engaged in reassurance seeking in the room with me, I'm not just going to like describe exposure to them and make a plan for them to practice that outside the room, but I want to spend time helping them notice like that thing you just asked me to try and eliminate that doubt. You know, what do you think is going to happen if I reassure you about that, if I try to? What will happen in the next few seconds? What will happen in the next few minutes? How is that like what you do over there in that part of your life? So it's useful to try and weaken the control patterns that show up in the room that not just you hear reports about, but that you can see happening in front of you. Because if you can disrupt them here now, that sets you up much better for the work that's to come later. We might miss opportunities also to practice creative hopelessness, and that increases the chances of getting stuck more often later on. There can be really challenging patterns of behavior that people rely on, they've learned to rely on. And in the room with you, they might look like seeking reassurance from you, intellectualizing their experience frequently. Maybe there's a lot of passivity in how they relate to others. Maybe they use humor all the time whenever like there's a sniff of discomfort. Maybe they talk a lot, engage in self-criticism. Unless we're trying to like weaken those behaviors, disrupt them, um, then the chances of those behaviors continuing, I think, are quite high. A client might understand ACT ideas, but they keep repeating the same controlling responses. So again, another reason why we want to try and weaken those patterns in the room. And unintentionally, I might reinforce avoidance by allowing the session to remain too comfortable or too conceptual. I once heard Matthew Skinner say, every therapy session should have a bit of awkward. Like, if my therapy session hasn't had a moment where I feel awkward or my client feels awkward, we're into an easy room. Like, discomfort precedes growth. And so, like, weakening these control patterns can feel uncomfortable for the client, can feel uncomfortable for us. Yet it's really important that we create contexts where that can be experienced. So I think our job at this stage is to take our time to help clients see the patterns that they're engaged in more clearly and what they get when they do those things. That we want to build aversive relations and functions with staying the same. So this is where metaphor can be really useful. Like, if we can work with a client to build a metaphor that changes how they feel about continuing to do the same thing, that it starts to feel kind of more negative for them. Those aversive relations, if you like, or to say it in other ways, to change what something means for somebody. Um, like, I don't really want to stay the same because actually, um, when I do this, I'm teaching my child how to like avoid what it is that they're feeling. When I avoid what I'm feeling, what I'm showing is my child how to avoid their feelings. When being a parent, you know, it's like it gets right to the heart of the matter. And something like that, people no longer are quite as invested in avoidance when they can start to see what it also means. And when somebody starts to become more uncomfortable with staying the same, then they're a bit more ready for psychological flexibility. So we're gently and persistently, not just at the beginning of therapy, but I sort of expect to have to do this every session, gently and persistently undermining the workability of these existing strategies. And when people contact the futility of something, they then start to become more open, more receptive, more curious to a different set of responses, functionally different set of responses. So questions I like to ask myself to help me determine, am I ready to move on? What is the client doing to reduce discomfort or unintentionally create their suffering? Do I know that? Do they know that? Are we seeing it when it happens in the room? How am I helping them see and experience that pattern, the costs of that pattern, rather than just talking about it? So creative hopelessness isn't just like an intellectual costs and benefits exercise. It's like if you can like close your eyes for a moment, you know, and picture yourself at home on your own, separate from everybody else. What do you notice this feels like? What do you notice you're missing out on? That kind of experiential exercise really brings somebody up close in a felt way to what these patterns are costing them. Am I moving too quickly towards solutions before the pattern has been observed in the present moment? That's what I'm talking about. Trying to shape behavior in the here and now, not just over there where the problem occurs. Okay, we're doing all right for time here. I'm surprised. I've got 10 minutes left and we've got one more bit to look at here, which is the strengthening psychological flexibility. What problems can occur here? I think one of the things that I have come across is that while we can be more familiar with psychological flexibility techniques, we may limit their impact by trying to teach them rather than train them. Have you ever been to, well, I guess it's a bit like what I'm doing today. Like I'm teaching something much more here because I'm describing ideas, I'm talking to you, there's limited interaction so far. There's little that I've had you do. Whereas in a therapy session or a workshop, there would be much more interaction where I'd have you participate in something. And that would be more of a training context. That's different from teaching. You build skills much more in a training context and opportunity than you do in a teaching one, which helps you to understand things differently. But in ACT, you know, there's not a process in the Hexaflex that's helped my client understand something better. It's all about trying to do things differently. And it could also be in a way that's disconnected from the heart of that. And I'll say a bit more about that as I go through these issues. So this can happen when we're talking about processes more than showing them. Like, do you notice how often you might be willing to say, I'd like to try an exercise with you that I think might help. Would you be willing to give it a go? And that's the extent of your explanation about the particular exercise. It's very brief, very minimal. Do you notice being open to taking that chance? Or do you turn more toward a sort of more fuller explanation of you want somebody to understand something better? I guess that's, that can be okay, but we run the risk of spending too much time on explanation. Shaping behavior is about, well, helping people do things differently, but we can do it in three ways. We can model, i.e., we show somebody what it is that we want them to do. So, for example, I might say to somebody, I'm sat here and I've got this thought in my mind that I'm noticing. Um, and I just want to check out with you. This fits with something about your experience. So in the way that I say that, I'm modeling a present moment awareness in the language that I'm using. And I might use that as a basis for evoking. So for example, after I've said, I'm noticing this in my mind, I might ask them, what are you noticing in your mind in this moment? I think where a lot of practitioners can get stuck when doing flexibility work is they do a lot of evoking. There's a lot of probes and prompts for a client to do this work, but we might not model it often enough. We might not use our experience and bring our flexibility into the room as much or as explicitly as we could. And then I think what also happens probably even less in a way that we get stuck is we don't reinforce flexibility when we see it. We might say things like, oh, good catch when you see somebody noticing something like, and that would be a reinforcing move. But like, I can fall into that trap of when a client has showed me or reported on like, their efforts, this work that they've put in, and I can rush too quickly into what next. And I miss the opportunity there to take the time and go, wow, what was it like to do that for yourself? How do you think other people experienced it when you did that? How encouraged do you feel to do this again? Wow, I'm really impressed. I know how hard that's been for you. These sorts of reinforcing moves can be really useful in terms of shaping behavior in the long term. When it comes to the heart, we might not know so well how to use the therapeutic relationship to influence change. I think this is really connected to the heart, as I was just describing. And I think when we start to like orient more to the therapeutic relationship and to our experience, we're starting to connect more with that flexibility in ourselves. It starts to become more embodied, not just a heady thing. You know, sometimes it's useful for a client to hear my experience. Like if I feel frustrated or scared or angry or whatever, like it, there's a good chance in at least some of those moments that I'm feeling what other people in their life also feel when they do that. And my client might be quite unaware of it. And if it's important to them to improve communication or relationships to be better, it could be really useful for me to describe what I'm experiencing in that moment and to ask them, like, how surprised are you to hear that? How aware are you that I might be feeling that? Do you think other people might be feeling that in your life? And so these is a way of using the relationship in your own experiences to shape a client's behavior towards what they want. So at this stage, some useful things to think about are strengthening your openness, awareness, and engagement in ways that are tied to the client's actual patterns and goals. That we're helping clients practice new responses in meaningful ways, and that we're making this shift from understanding concepts to like a selection, like an experiential. I'm going to choose this particular thing now. I'm going to do it. It's going to be functionally different to the things that I've done before. That's the variation. And I'm going to try and like build a pattern of doing this more often. That's the retention. And so practical questions you might ask yourself, which processes have I targeted and which have I not? How can I show them how to do this here and now? How often am I rewarding flexibility as well as evoking it? Am I aware of the interpersonal relating patterns between us? Like how something functions for me, how what I say functions for them. How aware am I of opportunities to use my experiences? Sometimes maybe even self-disclosure, which can be tricky to shape behavior change. And what would real expansion look like for this client? These questions, I think, can be really useful in guiding and thinking about how to get the most out of shaping psychological flexibility. Okay. Oh, yeah. What I wanted to briefly talk about as well is that, as I said, what I've presented to you today is something that I teach in a training program that I do, which is a 6-month advanced ACT training program. So suitable for anybody who's been using ACT for a year or two, or at least has done some basic training and feels like they use it in their model regularly. Um, it's a developmental program. It's really designed to help you move from feeling stuck to developing a more embodied way of working, building confidence and presence and flexibility in the room. We do a lot of deliberate practice in this, so we do a lot of role play and getting feedback on the work that you're doing, targeting specific ways incrementally to improve, learning how to handle complexity better, and deepening functional analysis and a moment-to-moment awareness. So it includes, as I said, those deliberate practice opportunities. We do live coaching and feedback in a small group of 5 people each week over the course of 6 months. We practice functional analysis. We do reflective practice journaling. And that the next program starts in September. That's now forming. So if you are, oh, sorry, and one thing to notice about this is that I do 3 cohorts a year, January, May,
Just
September.
there, Jim. I'm due to leave because I've got client staff with. So
Okay,
thank you
no
so much.
worries, Mary. Thanks for coming.
Yeah, thanks. Bye bye.
And the coaching calls happen at different times of day and in the week when it comes to those programs. So if you're interested in the September program, we will be doing Mondays from 4 till 5. And if you want to find out more information about that, you can either go to openforwards.com/act advanced act training, or you can scan that QR code with your phone. And I've just got 5 places. I'll keep the group small. And a couple of those are filled already. And I am offering a significant discount for somebody who lives in a low or a middle income country. Okay, that's what I wanted to share with you. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen. Hello, there you all are. And I wanted to take this opportunity for you to ask any questions about what we've talked about today. Yeah, really love to. Obviously, if you got to go, appreciate that. Feel free to just sign off, and I'll send you the video and the slides. But if you'd like to stay and have a bit of a conversation, then please do. So, does anyone have any questions?
This is Jill again. I have a question. I have lots of
Hello,
questions
thank you.
since no one else is asking. You talked about modeling.
Mm,
Can you talk about more about modeling in obviously experientially inside of the session, like we're not talking about, but we're doing the intervention, and how that might intersect with like self-disclosure. Like maybe are you talking about like, oh, like
mm.
telling it you can model several different ways. We can experience in the session, or we can talk about a time where you have your experience of that intervention in your own life through more of a self-disclosure process. Is that
Yeah. So I guess I notice self-disclosure can be very powerful when a client is struggling with shame. Because I think one of the things that happens inside shame is I want to withdraw. There's a bunch of judgment going on that I'm the only one. There's something wrong with me. Everyone else is okay, but I'm not. And there's this sort of harshness within the way that they relate to themselves. People often have a lot of contempt for themselves. And so I tend to do quite a bit of modeling and self-disclosure in those contexts. Like I might say, I know my version of feeling ashamed. You know, I, you know, I notice my failures as a parent. I have a thought that I'm a bad dad. And I might take a moment to say, like, what's it like for you to hear me say those things? My intention in saying them is I want my client to know that although they're over there with their experience and I'm over here with mine, we're also in the same boat as human beings. And so I'm really tapping into that common humanity piece like Kristen Neff talks about in terms of creating connection. And so, like in those moments, if my client can start to experience that they're not the only one that feels shame, they're not the only one that fails, they're not the only one that finds things really painful, like it can start to change something significant for them. That's a way I might use modeling and self-disclosure.
And I noticed in that you didn't give any real personal details of your life, but you disclosed your experience, like the common experience. I think
Right.
that's the difference. You're not crossing professional or ethical lines by giving too many details, but you are really it's focused on connection.
Yeah, yeah,
Oh,
that's right. Yeah. And that was definitely clear in that example. Sometimes I do go into more detail. It depends. Depends who it is, how long I've been working with them. Like whether something like what I just said gets dismissed. Um, like it might not be specific enough for that person, for that context to really, for that to work in the way that I was hoping for. Do you know the post-it note exercise where you write down like the harshest criticism about yourself? I am this. And of course you get to know that what that looks like for a client. But and sometimes I've done exercises with people in the therapy room where I've said, would you be willing to write that down on a piece of paper and stick it on your chest? And I will do the same. And so I'll write my version down, and we both sat there with this like on our chest, looking at each other and looking at and seeing into each other's minds about, what those criticisms are, and it's interesting. It often evokes something from the person sat in front of me. It goes, wow, that's really interesting. I don't see you like that. Um, but it's often been useful when I've done it.
okay. And and then on the other side of the question, do you model in a non-disclosing way? How do you, I guess, model the technique in the session?
Well, any
That,
technique.
that might be a larger question because your whole presentation was on that. So,
Yeah. So if I'm modeling values, for example, I would
mhm,
point to and describe my values as a therapist or as in another role that I have in my life.
mhm.
Um, if I was modeling acceptance, I might say I notice myself not being sure what it is to do right now.
Oh, great. Yeah, that makes sense. Okay,
And there's like,
I
and
see
that
that.
feels anxious to say because I'm not quite sure how that's going to work for you hearing that from me.
Okay, yeah, I can see that. Okay, thank you. That makes
Yeah.
sense.
Okay. All right. Thanks, Jill. They're great questions. Anybody else like to ask anything?
Hi, this is Francesca from Michigan.
Hello.
This was Hi, this was great. I've learned quite a bit. One of the things I was wondering about was when you were talking about it was within the weakened control patterns part of the things you were talking about metaphors. Um,
Hmm.
the use of metaphors could be helpful. What do you have like specific metaphors that you tend to utilize, or is it really personalized to the client and their experience?
Yeah, it's become much more so. And I think that comes with practice. Like when I've like read books about, the practice of metaphors by Nicholas Tornecki, or I've been on metaphor related workshops, it's trained me to pay attention to the language that people use much more. And so I think I'm better than I used to be at noticing what metaphors people actually start to use in their language already. And so it's often works much better when we can I can like build on top of a metaphor they've already started to use, or we co-create the development of a metaphor. So I sometimes look into my own mind and think I've got a picture of this in my head, like I've got a picture of something pushing down on something or something being trapped by something. Um, like this looks a lot like a prison, or this looks a lot like, you know, that you're enslaved to something, being controlled by the invisible hand in the background, the wizard behind the curtain. Um, that, and I do that much more than I think like the sort of same sort of like textbook metaphors that might have been described in the big book of act metaphors, I think it's called, if I said that right. Um, but either way, like if using metaphor more often is something you notice you want to do in your work, there's no harm in starting with like these templated metaphors that often like can connect with somebody. And the more you practice that, then you can, I think, be in a better position to start thinking about like, how do I co-create this with somebody?
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Francesca.
Would you perhaps say something about um, therapies that you've been working on for quite a while, where you, or at least where I see myself being stuck with my patient, especially when it's more towards the ADHD, autism spectrum problems, where the patient is well aware of that we're just looping and that we have been discussing we need to do something else, but still he doesn't want to change, but he wants to come back.
Mm,
I think that is one of my hardest cases at the moment.
yeah.
And thank you so much for this hour.
You're welcome, Marie. It's nice to see you again.
Nice
Um,
to see you again.
are you talking about when a client will say, yes, I can see that I keep doing this? And you might interrupt them and you start to help them practice something, but it would just be for a moment, and then they're right back into, yeah,
Mm.
yeah,
Especially with all of the details and having to explain in every detail to be sure that I understand like every single thing and not being able to let that go, even though we have tried to figure out, okay, what's the function of this explanation, and still keeping
yeah.
on.
I think it can be useful to take the risk of being annoying, of annoying your client. Um, like, and what I mean is like to interrupt them frequently, more often. You know, if somebody like keeps trying to problem solve with me, for example, and they keep saying yes, but I might like get faster and faster. You know, not quite, but almost like that Austin Powers clip where he's going shh, 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 like that. You know, not quite like that, but almost like that. I'm trying to come in quicker with the interruptions, with the disruptions to say, look, there it is again, and again, and again, and again. And so what I'm trying to do in those moments is disrupt that pattern and also show very little interest in the detail of what they're talking about. Because even if I just show the little bit of interest, what I'm doing is I'm reinforcing avoidance.
Mm.
And this is the trouble where validation can like be done at the wrong time. You end up validating avoidance rather than the flexibility.
Mm.
So yeah, being a bit more, I guess, kind of willing to take a risk of annoying your client, playing with irreverence. What I mean is um, like doing things that a client might not expect their therapist to do. Like, um, like sometimes I said, what I've started to think when you're talking is um, sometimes wonder whether it matters whether I'm here or not.
Mm.
Like that's a surprising thing for a client to hear from their therapist, and it can feel a risk to say it. Like, but if I'm surprising my client, if they're kind of going, oh, what? If they feel confused in some way by what I've done, I've been successful for a moment in helping them to stop doing the thing that they keep doing.
I think I just have to have more and more of those interventions and even less of the validation because I think I've tried all I've said, but I guess that I'm probably reinforcing in some way that I'm not quite clear of. So I think I'll need to see more of what I'm doing. But thank you anyways. I think it was very useful and also to kind of be encouraged to be even more interactive than I am. So thank you so much.
Yes, you're welcome, Marie. Thanks for the question. I think it's a common challenge that we have. Mm. We've still got time for more questions. Is there something you've been thinking about asking but not quite sure or
I guess the follow-up to that question is just how you balance that with trying to like preserve the therapeutic relationship a little bit in the same way of just being like, do you give context as to why you're doing that? Do you say this is why I'm interrupting you, or do you kind of feel like you just go with the client's response? I don't know if that made
Mm.
any sense.
Yeah. It's again a great question. Um, I would say no, I don't do that. I don't give an explanation. I'm and a reason I don't is what I'm hoping for is impact. And when I start to use more words, impact is often reduced. And so I want to be concise in the way that I just gave that example because I want them to be surprised quickly. I'm trying to like disrupt that pattern that they're engaged in quickly in a way where they don't then rush into repeating it again quickly. So how I balance it is I am also very ready to respond in a reinforcing way to something new and different. So if I see something that looks more like, I don't know what to do then I'll probably lean in and say, now we're getting somewhere. Or that could be a really useful thing. So it's holding in mind, I guess, it's the idea of differential reinforcers, punishment and reward. And so I'm trying to weaken control, as we said in the cycle, when it comes to the things that are getting in the way of change, but then really ready to reward the things that look more flexible.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Thanks,
I was
Francesca.
I was gonna ask, is that a form of punishment? Because I was just thinking that's like punishment. Or is that just an you're just not reinforcing. You're not punishing the client, but it is.
I guess it depends how you might define it. Like it's if we think about punishment in behavioral terms, it's it's an operant. So we're adding a behavior that makes it less likely somebody will keep doing something. Yeah, and that's a bit different to how we think about punishment in the everyday sense. So if I'm adding something like irreverent or I'm interrupting and it leads to them doing less of the thing or stopping the thing that's not helping, then technically you could say that was punishment, I think. Hmm, thanks. Trevor, hello.
Hi. Yeah, a distinction that I think you really helped me with that might add to this conversation is like punishing the behavior, not punishing the person.
All right. Hmm.
And I've just uploaded in the chat actually the connection challenge matrix, which I think Contextual Consulting did a nice little kind of graphic of that, which is part of what you're speaking about here. And I've just also found that a useful, like the sweet spot of this is really being in obviously that high connection space, but without the challenge, which sometimes is going to involve punishing the behavior. Without that challenge, you essentially don't get any change with the client. You know, the therapy just becomes this really nice kind of interaction that they get once a week or once a fortnight, but ultimately, you know, they stay inside of the struggle.
Hmm.
I just wanted to let people know I've added that to the chat.
Thank you, Trevor. That's cool. Appreciate that. I've just downloaded it. I'll have a look at it after. Did someone else have their hand raised or did that get put down?
I raised my hand and then I partly took it down because you partly answered my question. But what it was about the part when you get the client confused uh, and um it just blocks when the interest in what's going on, everything is just not available. They just blank out because they can't do what they're used to doing.
Right.
Because then you said, okay, now we're getting somewhere. Then you lean in. But when there's nothing to kind of lean into, if that gives meaning for you.
Yeah. Yeah. I think people sometimes use the word blocking, I've heard, to describe this um this response pattern from the therapist. Yeah. You know, people that do that. I like the word disruption. I'm trying to disrupt patterns of behavior that are inflexible. And that's about weakening the control in step three of that process. So that when somebody stops doing something, like now we can start to build flexibility. Kristen, hi.
Hi, Jim. Thank you so much for this training. Very helpful, and I'm gonna be marinating in what you've shared for a bit afterwards. This is a training question, so if this is something better taken offline, please let me know. I was thinking about the 6 month training you mentioned at the end. I looked a little bit at your website, and I guess I'm wondering for those of us who've had an introduction to ACT, but may not be able to commit to the 6 month training cost wise or time wise, do you offer something in between, some sort of workshop available?
So,
Um,
so, yeah, I do less and less like one-off workshops than I used to. And really that's because I think what I'm interested in really most of all is helping people develop their skills. And I don't think one-off workshops do that particularly effectively. So that's why I created that program. But another way that I help people to do that, if that answers your question, is I run something called the ACT Learning Center. And so this is um, it's a online community, um, some of whom I can see on the screen. They're currently members. And so we do a bunch of things. We meet twice a week. We have a practice session where we do role play on a Tuesday, and we have a case conceptualization clinic on a Thursday where we help people develop their functional analyses of their client work. And there are various other resources in there as well, various courses that I've taught that you can take at your own pace. We also do a book club. We're starting our next book in September. We're going to read Inside This Moment together. That's by Kirk Strossel and Patricia Robinson. And so, yes, it's a way of like committing less, but still committing to ongoing development. Like it's a much lower fee. It's not a cohort program. You can be for a member for it as little or as long as you like. And each month we have certain themes that we try and pay a bit of attention to give us a focus. And so you'll find that on my website as well.
Thank you very much for that.
Thanks, Kristen. Eugene.
When you interrupt a client and he blanks out, not the therapist blocking the client, but inside the client blocks. How would you deal with that? He goes blank.
What do you mean goes blank?
Now you interrupt him and then he doesn't know what to say or to do anymore. He blocks, literally. How would you go about that one?
I guess I'd probably trying to pay attention to the non-verbal in the moment. Am I noticing something different in terms of their facial expression, their posture, their gaze? Maybe if I do notice something like that, I might say, I've noticed something shifted here. Like, you're no longer fidgeting in your seat, but you look quite still. Are you aware of that? So yes, I'd be looking for those non-verbal things first that show me there might be indications of something functionally different starting to occur. And I might just wait longer with them in the silence. Like when you take more time in silence as well, you can come down from your head. And there might be a bit of panic of like, oh, have I upset them? Or like, what do I do now? But then if you come down into your eyes, you can start to pay attention to the non-verbal in front of you. But then again, if you wait a bit longer, you can come down into your body and you can go and breathe and like try to notice, what am I experiencing here? What's my felt experience? And that might lead you to a different response that you won't get to if you're just in your head thinking about what to do next.
That could be a great opportunity for the therapist when that happens.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks, Eugene. Great question. Okay, we've got just a couple of minutes left. Is there any final comments or questions about anything? Well, in that case, I will thank you once again for spending time with me. I appreciate that a huge amount. And as I said, the video and the slides will come your way as soon as I've got that copy of it. Yeah, thank you for being here and get in touch if you have any other comments or questions about anything. Take care.
Thank you.
I only want to say I'm from Czech Republic and I am a beginner in ACT. I got ACT training with our like teachers. They did ACT in the Great Britain. They are, I don't know if you know them, Lucka or Helena Wondorčíková
Yes, I
and
know them. Yeah.
Lucia, I don't know her the second. So uh, I see your emails in my email box. So I was like, I can try to go in your this session, this meeting, and I will see how I will understand and so on, because I think I have good like conversation English, but
Yeah.
this specialist, um, I wasn't much comfortable, but if I would like to do, if I would like to practice act in future, now I don't need. I care for grandma.
Mm.
She's 90, and
Okay.
so I am with her. But I'm thinking about future, how to spend and how to work with my knowledges about ACT. And I would like to give more, no, to take more informations from maybe your meetings or another else.
Yes.
So I like to open these meetings. Yeah. So you are the first for me,
Excellent.
the first teacher.
Oh, wow. I'm honored.
So thank you.
You're welcome, Petra.
I like to be here with everybody who will be who
Yeah.
will be no
I,
who
I will
was here.
I will do more of these, and so I will let you know when those things are going to happen.
Yeah, I think I will be more comfortable when I will meet more meetings.
Yes,
So
I
thank you
understand.
very much.
You're welcome, Petra. Thank you for
Bye
coming.
bye.
Bye bye.